Namaste. I've been asked to cover downward facing dog. Make sure you subscribe, and then I will also take any suggestions or requests from you. And because this posture is so common and we think of it as a basic posture, I think it's easy to discount it as not really all that interesting, but actually it's one of my favorite postures because you can do so much with it depending on what your intention is. There's lots of different little variations that we can do for maybe opening up the shoulders, maybe practicing our handstands, building strength for handstands, or opening up the back of the legs, or getting a side body stretch, or even opening up the front of the shins. So I'm going to run you through some different variations, and we're just going to be in downward facing dog a lot, but kind of like wiggling around, moving around, feeling in our bodies the way that it feels when we make these little tweaks. Okay, so first of all, if you do struggle with downward facing dog, then the first thing I would suggest looking at is what yoga mat you're using. A lot of the cheaper yoga mats out there allow you to slip and slide, and that can make a posture like downward facing dog especially quite challenging, and not in the way that we want to be challenged. It's just distracting. So I would suggest a Lifeform yoga mat. They are the best yoga mats in the world. Believe me, I've tried many. These have nice alignment cues on them, and they're naturally non-stick, and they're also eco-friendly. I'll put a link in the description with a code that you can use for a discount on Lifeform if you choose to get one. So, to begin, we'll just go ahead and go into a downward facing dog. We'll start from a tabletop position with the knees down on the mat, underneath the hips, the hands underneath the shoulders. Now, first of all, before we even go into the downward facing dog, look down at your hands and maybe just rock forwards and backwards a little bit over your hands. Make sure that the knuckles of the first two fingers are staying down on the mat. If they tend to come up off the mat, then it may be because your wrists are a little bit tight, and see if turning your hands out just slightly helps with that. So maybe instead of your middle finger pointing forwards, you turn your hands out so that your first finger points forward, your index finger. And that just allows a little bit more movement in the wrists, and then you can make sure and have those first knuckles down. It's important that we keep the hands flat in downward facing dog and not let them lift up, because if we're putting weight on the heel of our hand, the bottom of our hand, then that can start to compress the ligaments there, and it leads to wrist pain. So think of having your weight evenly distributed in your hands, just like you would in your feet when you're standing on your feet. And while you're here in your tabletop, play around with what's happening in your shoulders. So to begin, we'll just sink the chest down without bending the elbows. Squeeze the shoulder blades together behind you, and then press up. So it's kind of like we're doing cat-cow, but it's just in the shoulders. Feel the difference between these two movements. So just spreading the shoulder blades wide and then squeezing them together. Okay, so what we're looking for in a downward facing dog is usually having the scapulas protracted, and that means the shoulder blades spread out wide across the back with external rotation through the upper arm. So what does that mean? Think about what your elbows are doing. So can you turn your elbows so that the points of your elbows are pointing back towards your knees? And you can check that by just bending slightly your elbows. If your arms are bending out to the side, then you need to wrap your elbows back so that when you bend them, they point back towards your knees, okay? So once you've got a feel for that, tuck the toes under and begin lifting the knees up off the mat. Keep your knees bent at this point, okay? And if it feels more comfortable, you can increase the distance between your hands and your feet. There's many variations of a downward facing dog. Some, why not? You can have your stance really wide, or you can have your stance really short. It's all still a downward facing dog, really. So that's definitely something that you can play around with as well, how far apart your hands and feet are. But with the feet hip width distance, knees bent, don't worry about what's happening in the legs right now. Just keep the knees bent as much as they need to feel comfortable here. And think about pressing your armpits back towards your knees. So not curving this line between the wrists and the hips, but rather having it nice and straight. Okay? And once again, bring your attention to those things that I mentioned before. Make sure that your hands are pressing down evenly. You're pressing through your shoulders. So maybe you feel your shoulders lift up towards your ears, and then pay attention what's happening with your elbows if you bend them. Are they going out to the side? If they are, try and turn your arms so that now the elbows point down towards the mat. So you could even go all the way down and you find yourself in dolphin pose. Okay? That's the shoulder alignment that we're looking for. And with this pressing, we're engaging the muscles. You might even start to feel it burning a little bit now. So downward facing dog is not necessarily somewhere that we just hang out. And if you've got really mobile shoulders, you might find it's easy just to kind of hang out here and just fall into it. And that's also not what we're looking for. We want to keep all the muscles active and engaged. Now you can look back towards your feet, or you can look up at your belly button if you want to. I prefer just to look back at my feet. Make sure though that your gaze is back behind you. If you're looking down at your mat, or if you're looking towards your hands, then you're going to be crunching in your neck, and we want a nice long spine. So we'll keep going up the spine with what's happening, and begin to pay attention to your lumbar spine. So if you think about what you do when you do cat-cow movements, so this is cat-cow, right? We got our cat pose and our cow pose. This is an articulation of the pelvis, right? So you can do the same here in downward facing dog. Get a feel for kind of tucking the tailbone under and then reaching it up. Okay, so can you play around with that? It's a bit challenging here in a downward facing dog as opposed to having the knees down. But play around with what's happening in your hips here, okay? And what we're looking for in our downward facing dog is to have the spine as long as possible. And so what tends to happen is we get this kind of rounding through the lumbar, like kind of the cat pose. But what we want to do is get the sit bones lifted, the tailbone lifted up towards the ceiling as much as possible. That is going to put more of a stretch on the back of the knees, however. So you may be feeling that, so just bend the knees. So you should be in a very nice downward facing dog by now. If at this point you feel like you can begin to straighten your knees a little bit, then you can do so. But if straightening your knees means that this happens and your shoulders come forward, then just keep the knees bent. Okay, so what happens in this downward facing dog with the shoulders really pressing up and getting that external rotation? So what happens when the elbows bend back is that's the same alignment that we want our arms to be in when we practice our handstands. So I really love thinking of downward facing dog as an opportunity to practice my handstands without my feet even coming up off the mat. Because by practicing a downward facing dog with nice strong shoulders in external rotation, we're teaching our bodies the shape that they need to be in a handstand. So then you don't have to think about it so much when you're just trying to balance on your hands, because it's going to be habitual for your body. So this shape, instead of kind of just resting in your downward facing dog, but really pushing up, don't be afraid to have your shoulders up by your ears, with external rotation and pressing down through the knuckles of the fingers right here. That's the alignment that we're looking for in a downward facing dog, and it's going to be really beneficial if you are working towards handstands. So forget about having your knees straight. You can work on the mobility of the back of the legs elsewhere in your yoga practice, but downward facing dog is just so beneficial for shoulder opening and shoulder strength in this shape, which we don't really get anywhere else. So I personally think it's very useful to use downward facing dog for this purpose. But we'll move on, play around with some different variations, slight variations of downward facing dog. So come back into the nicely aligned downward facing dog. Knees can be bent. Just make sure you're pressing through the shoulders. Your hands are pressing down evenly. Bend your right knee and bring your right knee across the center of your body, and really then reach the left hip up towards the ceiling. So you should be getting a nice stretch through the left side body. And then repeat on the other side. So bend the left knee, cross it over your body, and press the right hips up towards the ceiling. So really nice side body opener here. Getting a little bit of a twist in through the hips. And feel free to wiggle around here. You can add like wiggles here, like that cat-cow movement through the hips as well, just to see what happens if you change the shape slightly of your body. Okay. Another variation that I really like to do, especially towards the beginning of my yoga practice when I'm still just warming up into my body, take the top of the foot, just one foot at a time for now, and you can begin to just press that in, play around with bringing a little bit more weight into the tops of the toes, and repeat on the other side. So stretching out through the front of the shin and the ankle. If it feels comfortable for you, you may even find that you can do both feet at the same time. Just wiggle around here, play around with it. I really love how this feels on my feet personally. Okay, and with the attention in our feet, also play around with pressing through the outsides of the feet, almost like you're trying to lift the insides of the feet up even higher, and then go all the way to the other side. So press down into the arches of the feet like you're trying to lift up the outsides. So again, just kind of rolling the ankle from inside to outside, and see how that changes how it feels in your legs. Little changes like this can lead to discoveries, I think. What's happening in your body, what's tight and what's not. Okay. You can also play around with bringing the feet, the toes wide and the heels together, or maybe the heels wide and the toes together. All these little changes, very simple, but they can be quite profound. I'm personally loving this one right now with the internal rotation through the legs. You can also have the feet as wide as your yoga mat. feel into that. See how that feels. And then take the feet so that the toes are touching and the ankles are together. Good. And now that we're really warm, we'll do one more little variation that I really love to do for opening up the shoulders. And with the feet just hip width distance, what we're looking to do is activate through the shoulders, really press, use all those pushing muscles, get the sides of the shoulders, the side body switched on. Begin to, with the knees bent, look down at your mat and see if you can bring your nose down towards the mat, maybe like you're trying to kiss your mat because you love it so much. You can just come back and forth a few times. So just really opening up through the shoulders and chest here. Kind of like we're going towards an extended puppy pose. You could even do that, take the hands a little bit further away. And this is challenging, okay? If you're finding that this is just like crazy difficult, don't worry about it. It's not the easiest. But you could even, find how far apart you need your hands and feet to end up in an extended puppy pose. But being able to move in and out of that with control. So we're not just falling into it, but you can press yourself back out again. Really, really good. So I hope that's been useful for you and given you a few ideas of ways that you can change your downward facing dog a little bit to get the most out of it. Don't forget to subscribe and let me know what you would like me to cover next. Namaste.